I should have known something was wrong the moment I stepped into Ravenwood Towers. It wasn't the peeling wallpaper or the way the overhead light buzzed like a dying insect. It wasn't even the smell, a strange mix of damp wood and something faintly metallic like old blood. No, it was the silence. A building this size, in the middle of Ohio, should have some kind of life. A television murmuring behind a door, footsteps echoing down the hallway, muffled voices from the floors above. But here, there was nothing, just the quiet hum of something unseen, pressing against my ears. The landlord, Pavlov Drexler, stood in the dimly lit lobby, watching me with a smile that never quite reached his pale blue eyes. He was tall and thin, with skin stretched too tight over his face, making him look like a wax figure left out in the sun for too long. His suit was neat, black, and old-fashioned, like he had stepped out of another time. "You must be Jordan Calloway," he said, voice smooth, deliberate. "Welcome to your new home." His handshake was cold. I adjusted my backpack, suddenly aware of how heavy it felt. "Thanks. The listing said there aren't many tenants." His smile didn't waver. "People come and go." That should have been my first red flag. He led me to the elevator, its metal doors dented and scuffed. As we ascended, the silence deepened. I tried to ignore the faint scratching sound coming from the walls, like something small and desperate trying to get out. "Sixth floor," Pavlov announced as the doors groaned open. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit by flickering bulbs. The air was thick, stale, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. My new apartment, 6B, was at the very end of the hall. Pavlov handed me a set of brass keys. "You'll find everything you need inside." That was another odd thing. The listing had said the place was unfurnished. Yet when I turned the key and pushed the door open, I found a fully furnished apartment waiting for me. A leather couch sat against the far wall, the cushions slightly indented, as if someone had just been sitting there. The kitchen was stocked, canned food, fresh fruit in a bowl, even milk in the fridge. A single coffee mug rested in the sink, a small stain at the bottom, like someone had finished a drink and left in a hurry. I turned back to Pavlov, unsettled. Did someone live here before me? His head tilted slightly, just enough to make my skin crawl. Not for long. Before I could ask anything else, he stepped back into the hallway. "If you need anything," he said, "I'm always around." Then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind me, and just like that, I was alone. I stood in the center of the room, listening. The silence here wasn't normal. It was thick, heavy, pressing in from all sides. I couldn't hear the floorboards creak from neighbors walking, no pipes groaning with water running. It was as if I had stepped into a world that had been forgotten. And then, somewhere in the vents, I heard it. A muffled whisper, faint, unintelligible, followed by a soft knock, coming from inside the walls. I woke up to the sound of something moving inside the walls. At first, I thought it was just the pipes. Old buildings make noises, and I was used to that. But this was different. It wasn't the dull creak of old wood or the hum of a heater kicking in. It was a sound that didn't belong. A whispering shuffle, like something crawling just behind the plaster. I sat up in bed, my eyes adjusting to the dim light from the street lamp outside. The room was quiet now. Too quiet. I could still feel the unnatural stillness in the air, like the entire apartment was holding its breath. I reached for my phone to check the time. 3:13 a.m. A strange sense of unease settled in my chest. I wasn't sure why, but that time felt important, like I had seen it before. Then came a sound, a muffled scream, distant yet sharp, filtering through the air vents. I froze. It was brief, only lasting a second or two, but it was enough to send a cold chill up my spine. I waited, holding my breath, listening. Nothing. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was a weird dream bleeding into reality. But then I heard the whisper, faint, like a voice carried through static. It was coming from the vents. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was soft, deliberate, almost like a warning. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, angling it toward the vent above my bed. The light caught something, faint smudges along the metal slats, as if someone had pressed their fingers against it from the other side. I shivered and quickly pulled my covers back over me, forcing myself to close my eyes. I didn't sleep much after that. The notebook. The next morning, I woke up groggy, my head heavy from lack of sleep. The apartment felt normal again, sunlight streaming through the window, the hum of distant traffic outside. I almost convinced myself that last night had been a mix of exhaustion and overactive imagination, until I found the notebook. It was wedged under a loose floorboard near the radiator. The only reason I even noticed it was because my foot had pressed down on the wood, making it shift slightly. Curious, I pried it up and pulled out a small, battered journal. The cover was worn, the edges frayed as if it had been handled too much or hidden for a long time. I sat on the couch and flipped it open. The handwriting inside was frantic, uneven, as if whoever wrote it had been in a hurry or afraid. The first page read, "If you're reading this, you need to leave. Now." My stomach twisted. I turned the page. "It knows when you sleep. It watches from the mirrors. Never open the door if you hear knocking after midnight. Never go near the basement. And whatever you do." The sentence cut off. The rest of the page was torn out. A sharp knock on my door made me jump. I turned, heart pounding. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the door, the notebook clutched in my hands. The knock came again. Slow, deliberate. I swallowed hard and stood up, moving toward the peephole. But when I looked through it, the hallway was empty. Who knocked? Where did they go? I didn't want to know. I stepped back, locked the door, and sat down, gripping the notebook. The unease from last night was creeping back in. The scream, the whispers, the smudges on the vent. And now this. Something was wrong with this place. And I was starting to think I had made a mistake moving in. The first time I met the woman in 3C, she told me her name was Margaret. The second time I met her, she told me her name was Eleanor. At first, I thought I misheard. Maybe I'd been too distracted, too exhausted from the restless nights in this strange apartment complex. But when I pointed it out, she just laughed softly and shook her head. "Oh dear, I think you must be mistaken," she said, her voice calm, her eyes too empty. She held a bag of groceries against her hip, her hand steady. I watched her disappear into her apartment, the door clicking shut behind her. But something about her unsettled me. It wasn't just a name slip, it was her face. It felt different. The first time we spoke, she had deep wrinkles around her mouth, like she had spent her whole life frowning. This time, her skin seemed tighter, her expression more neutral, as if something had smoothed over the lines overnight. That same night, I heard footsteps pacing outside my door. Slow, steady, back and forth. When I finally opened it, the hallway was empty. Who knocked? Where did they go? I didn't want to know. I stepped back, locked the door, and sat down, gripping the notebook. The unease from last night was creeping back in. The scream, the whispers, the smudges on the vent. And now this. Something was wrong with this place. And I was starting to think I had made a mistake moving in. The first time I met the woman in 3C, she told me her name was Margaret. The second time I met her, she told me her name was Eleanor. At first, I thought I misheard. Maybe I had been too distracted, too exhausted from the restless nights in this strange apartment complex. But when I pointed it out, she just laughed softly and shook her head. "Oh dear, I think you must be mistaken," she said, her voice calm, her eyes too empty. She held a bag of groceries against her hip, her hand steady. I watched her disappear into her apartment, the door clicking shut behind her. But something about her unsettled me. It wasn't just the name slip, it was her face. It felt different. The first time we spoke, she had deep wrinkles around her mouth, like she had spent her whole life frowning. This time, her skin seemed tighter, her expression more neutral, as if something had smoothed over the lines overnight. That same night, I heard footsteps pacing outside my door. Slow, steady, back and forth. When I finally opened it, the hallway was empty. The next morning, I decided to introduce myself to more of the tenants. Maybe I'd been imagining things. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. I knocked on the door of 4A. The man who answered was tall, gaunt, and pale, his eyes sunken deep into his skull. He stared at me for a moment before speaking. "Yes. Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "I just moved into 6B. Thought I'd introduce myself." He kept staring, unblinking. Finally, he nodded once. "Jordan." I hadn't told him my name. A strange chill crawled up my spine. "Yeah, that's me. And you are?" His lips parted slightly, as if he was about to speak. But then he just stood there, still, silent. Then, without another word, he shut the door in my face. I swallowed hard and turned to leave, but something made me stop. The peephole. It was still dark. The hallway was dim, but the way the light hit his door, I should have been able to see the tiny reflection of the peephole glass. But it was just black, like something or someone was standing behind it, watching me. I walked away quickly. That evening, as I climbed the stairs back to my floor, I passed 3C again. The door was slightly open, just enough to see inside. A single lamp was on, casting a dull yellow glow over the walls. And Margaret, or Eleanor, or whatever her name was, stood in front of a full-length mirror. But she wasn't moving. She was just staring at her reflection. No, not staring. Her head was tilted slightly, her eyes wide, her lips barely parted. It was as if she was waiting for something. Then, her reflection blinked, and she didn't. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The door creaked open a little wider. I ran the rest of the way to my apartment and locked the door behind me. The air in Ravenwood Towers always felt heavy, but tonight it was different. It pressed down on me like a thick, invisible hand, making it hard to breathe. I sat in my apartment, staring at the peeling wallpaper, trying to ignore the feeling that someone was watching me. Then I heard it. A soft click. It came from the hallway. I hesitated before standing. Every night since I moved in, I had walked past the basement door, and every night it was locked, bolted shut with rusted chains, as if someone had gone to great lengths to keep something inside. But now it was open, just slightly, no more than a crack, as if it had been waiting for me to notice. I swallowed hard. My instinct screamed at me to leave it alone, but my curiosity was louder. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped into the dimly lit corridor. The hallway stretched longer than I remembered, shadows crawling along the walls like living things. My footsteps felt too loud, echoing in a place that should have swallowed sound. When I reached the basement door, I hesitated. The air seeped out in waves, colder than it had any right to be. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first, damp, stale, and something metallic. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing concrete steps leading down into a void. I took a step forward, then another, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. Then my light flickered. For a split second, I saw something at the bottom of the stairs. A handprint. It was fresh, pressed into the wall, smeared down as if someone had been dragged. The fingers were long, too long, and the marks glistened as if they were still wet. My breath hitched. I stepped back, ready to run, but the door slammed shut behind me. Darkness swallowed everything. I spun, gripping my phone tighter, fumbling for the door handle. Locked. My breathing came in quick, shallow gasps. Then, from the darkness below, I heard it. A whisper. It wasn't words, not exactly. More like a sound that pressed against my ears, curling around my brain, thick and suffocating. And then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming up the stairs. I pounded on the door. Hey, let me out. No one answered. The footsteps grew closer. My flashlight flickered again, and for the briefest moment, I saw something moving in the shadows. A shape, tall and thin, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It stood at the bottom step, staring up at me. I didn't see its eyes, but I knew it was looking at me. Then a voice, smooth, calm, too close. You weren't supposed to see that yet. My stomach dropped. I turned my head slowly, and there, standing right beside me, was Pavlov Drexler. He smiled. I woke up with a sharp sting on my arm. At first, I thought it was just a dream, but when I pulled back the blanket, I saw them, thin, red scratches running down my forearm. They weren't deep, but they burned like fresh wounds. My heart pounded as I touched them, feeling the slight swell of irritated skin. I hadn't scratched myself. I was sure of it. The air in the apartment felt heavier, almost suffocating. The usual distant hum of the city outside had disappeared, replaced by an unnatural silence. No cars, no wind, no rustling trees. It was as if the world outside had been turned off. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. Maybe I had scratched myself in my sleep. Maybe I was overthinking things. But then my gaze drifted toward the dresser across the room. The mirror. My breath caught in my throat. I was looking at my reflection, but it was off. I leaned forward slightly. It didn't move immediately. Just a half-second delay, barely noticeable, but enough. My chest tightened. I lifted my hand hesitantly. The reflection followed, but again there was that lag. A fraction of a second where it remained still, as if it needed to catch up. I stared, willing my mind to make sense of it. It's just your imagination. The light. Maybe you're still half asleep. Then it smiled. I didn't. My body went rigid, cold washing over me like I'd been dunked into ice water. The face in the mirror, my face, curled into a grin. Slow, stretched, unnatural. I scrambled back, nearly falling off the bed. My reflection still stood there, still grinning. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't turn away. Then, just as suddenly, it snapped back into place. Expressionless. Perfectly normal. Like nothing had happened. I sat there, heart hammering against my ribs, watching my own face, waiting for something else to happen. But it didn't move. It was just me again. I forced myself to breathe. Maybe I was just sleep-deprived. Maybe it had been a trick of the light, or my tired brain filling in gaps. I had been feeling uneasy ever since moving here, and the lack of sleep wasn't helping. I needed to get out. Fresh air. I grabbed my phone and jacket and left the apartment, locking the door behind me. The hallway was dimly lit, the flickering ceiling light buzzing softly. Everything felt too still, too expectant. As I reached the stairs, I pulled out my phone. I needed to talk to someone. Anyone. Just to feel normal again. I dialed my friend Eric. The phone rang once. Twice. Then static. A sharp, grating hiss filled my ear, followed by a whisper, a voice that wasn't mine. He sees you now. I yanked the phone away and stared at the screen. The call had ended. My stomach twisted as I turned in a slow circle, scanning the empty hallway. The flickering light overhead buzzed louder. Shadows pooled at the far end of the corridor, stretching toward me. I wasn't alone. Something was watching me. I could feel it. The knock at my door comes at midnight, precise, unwavering. A sound that's somehow both familiar and completely foreign, like a door that shouldn't be there, echoing through my skull. I'm used to strange noises in this building, but this one hits different. I hesitate for a moment, staring at the door like it's suddenly become a puzzle I'm too tired to solve. It's him, Pavlov. I didn't have to see his face to know. The air shifts the moment I stand up. The hum in the walls seems to grow louder, vibrating in my chest, and I feel my heartbeat slow. It's almost like the building knows, like it's waiting for something to happen. Or maybe I am. I open the door, and there he stands, just like before, pale, gaunt, his face unnervingly calm. He's dressed in a dark, outdated suit that looks like it's from another era, but I can't bring myself to look away from his eyes. They're too quiet, too patient, like he's seen everything and is just waiting for me to catch up. Good evening, Jordan, Pavlov says, his voice smooth and too controlled. The same polite tone, as always. But there's something behind it, something I can't name. It's a weight in the air, a pressure that seems to bend everything around him. I wasn't expecting company, I mutter, trying to keep my voice steady, though it feels like I'm speaking from somewhere far away, somewhere distant. He doesn't answer at first. Instead, he looks past me into the apartment, as though taking a mental inventory of everything in this room I've come to call my own. His eyes linger for a second on the furniture, the dim light in the corner, the shadows hanging in the space. It's like he's examining more than just the physical. You've been here for a while now, he says finally, stepping inside without waiting for permission. I step back instinctively, but I don't stop him. I don't know why. Maybe it's the way he moves, like he's always been here, always belonged here. I close the door quietly behind him, and, as I do, the sound of the click lingers longer than it should. The hum grows louder, almost deafening now. I think you've begun to understand, Jordan. Pavlov continues, his voice low and almost affectionate. There's something unsettling in the way he says my name. What happens here? Why no one stays? Why no one leaves? I swallow, my throat dry. It's all I could do not to break eye contact with him. There's something in his gaze, something that makes my skin crawl, but also something that pulls me closer, like a gravity I can't escape. I don't understand anything, I say, though I know it's a lie. I know too much now. About the whispers. About the missing time. About the things that change when I'm not looking. He smiles, and the room seems to get colder. You will. Soon enough. I step back, trying to create space, try to think straight, but the air around us seems to thicken. My heart is hammering in my chest, and I feel dizzy, like I'm falling through the floor even though I'm standing still. I want to make you an offer, Pavlov says, his tone shifting now, a little softer. His hands are folded in front of him, like he's a teacher about to explain something complicated. You don't have to be like the others. You don't have to leave. You can stay. I'll show you what this place really is, what it's meant to be. I'll show you everything. I'm not sure what to say. I've been searching for answers ever since I got here, haven't I? I came looking for a story, a mystery, to unravel. But now, as he stands there, his offer hangs in the air like a trap, and I can feel it deep in my bones. There's no going back from this. What does that mean? I ask, though I don't want to hear the answer. I already know, somewhere inside me. I feel it tightening around my chest, but I can't make it stop. I want to know. I need to know. He tilts his head, like he's studying me, trying to read something I can't see. It means that you'll understand the truth about Ravenwood, about why it exists, why it's here, why no one ever leaves once they enter. You'll become part of it, Jordan. Part of everything. Part of what? The words feel foreign in my mouth, but they slip out anyway. You'll see, he says simply. You'll understand everything about this place, its purpose. You'll become what it needs you to be. I can't breathe. The walls feel too close. I feel like I'm suffocating, but I can't move. Can't think. He's offering me something, but I'm not sure what it is, and I'm not sure I want to know. But there's a price, Pavlov adds, his voice turning cold now, like a shadow creeping into the room. You can't leave, Jordan. Not ever. Not once you know. Not once you accept. I take a step back, my legs weak beneath me, and I know, deep down, that if I say yes, there will be no turning back. I'll be trapped in this place, caught between worlds, swallowed whole by whatever Ravenwood really is. The silence stretches, thick and heavy. He's waiting. I can feel his eyes on me, steady, calculating. I've never felt more watched in my life. I need to think. I say, though it's not what I mean. It's a lie. I already know what my answer is. He doesn't respond. He doesn't need to. The smile on his lips is all I need to see. And then, just like that, he's gone. The door clicks shut behind him, and the hum in the walls fades to a faint whisper. I stand there, paralyzed, my mind racing, but one thought lingers. I know what I have to do now, and there's no escape from it. I had to get out. The air in the apartment felt thicker now, like it was pressing in on me, suffocating me slowly, deliberately. The walls, those thin, peeling walls, were no longer just walls. They were alive. They were watching. I could feel it in every corner of the room, in every tiny vibration in the floorboards beneath my feet. Something was happening. Something was waking up, and I couldn't stay any longer. I packed my things in a daze. The sound of clothes rustling in the suitcase seemed oddly loud, echoing against the silence. Every step I took toward the door, my heart beat harder, faster, almost too much to bear. I was running on instinct now, the kind of pure, raw panic that grips you when you know something is wrong but can't explain it. I didn't care anymore about the apartment, or Pavlov, or anything. I just needed to leave, to breathe fresh air, to feel the ground beneath my feet again, and to know I wasn't trapped in this place. I opened the door to 6B, stepping out into the hallway, feeling the cold touch of the outside air. But as soon as my foot hit the hallway carpet, the feeling was wrong. Something shifted. I turned to look behind me. The door to my apartment was already closed, and it felt farther away. I could have sworn it was right next to me just a second ago. But now, it seemed like I had to reach out for it. I turned and walked quickly down the hallway, toward the exit. The sounds of my footsteps felt too loud, too harsh against the dead silence that hung around me. The lights flickered again, just a tiny blink of the fluorescent bulb overhead. But it was enough. My breath hitched in my throat. I kept walking, faster now. The hallway seemed to stretch longer, the walls narrowing as I moved forward. My pulse quickened, my steps quickened too, but the hallway didn't change. It felt endless, like I was walking in a loop. I glanced over my shoulder. The door to 6B was still there. It wasn't that far, but somehow, it felt wrong. It felt too close. I turned back around, my hands starting to shake. I reached for the exit door at the end of the hall, the heavy, rusted metal handle in my grip. My fingers trembled as I pushed the door open. I stepped outside. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face, sharp and biting. I could hear the wind rustling through the dead trees across the street. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. I was free. But then, something caught my eye. The apartment complex. Ravenwood Towers. It was still there, standing tall and silent behind me. I turned. I didn't want to, but I couldn't help myself. It was like something was pulling me back, tugging at me, like an invisible thread tied around my chest. I looked up at the complex. The windows, dark and empty, stared back at me. But for a split second, I saw something. A shadow, a figure, standing at one of the windows. It wasn't Pavlov. It was someone else. Someone I didn't recognize. I blinked, and the figure was gone. Just vanished. I shook my head. I must have imagined it. But I couldn't bring myself to look away. Something was wrong. Something was always wrong with this place. I turned back to the door, ready to step into the night and never look back. But the door to the outside, the door I just came through, wasn't there anymore. I blinked, stared. It was gone. The hallway stretched before me again, endless. I looked over my shoulder. The door to 6B was right behind me, just a few feet away. My heart dropped. No. I'd been outside. I'd stepped out into the cold. I had made it out. This couldn't be real. I turned and bolted. I ran back toward the exit again, but the hallway was the same. It just stretched on forever, like a cruel joke. My breaths were coming fast now, each inhale sharp and ragged. The walls seemed to pulse, the floor beneath me undulating, like the building itself was breathing. I turned a corner. The stairs. I'd take the stairs. They'd lead me out. They had to. I pushed open the door, but instead of staircase, I found another hallway. Another door. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. The air was too thick. It was choking me, suffocating me. I ran toward the front door again. I was desperate now. If I could just get out, if I could just make it. But as my hand touched the door handle, I froze. I could hear footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate. I turned. Pavlov stood there, in the hallway, as if he'd been waiting for me. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were different. There was a glint of something dark, something ancient, something too old for this world. I stepped back, my mouth dry, my legs refusing to move. The door behind me was still open, but I couldn't leave. Not anymore. Where are you going, Jordan? Pavlov's voice was soft, almost like a whisper, but it echoed in my mind. I need to get out. I gasped, my voice shaking. He smiled just a little. You understand now, don't you? You can't leave. You never really left. I turned to the door again, the cold air beckoning me, but I couldn't move. I couldn't leave. I was back in Unit 6B. The room was the same as it had been before. The fridge, the bed, the walls. It was all just as it was. I couldn't tell where the outside ended and the apartment began. The hallway was silent now. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I stood there, frozen, like I had never left. I heard Pavlov's voice again, but this time, it was just inside my head. You'll get used to it. All of us do. And then everything was quiet. Too quiet. It's been a while since I stopped wondering how I ended up here. The days blur together now. An endless stretch of monotonous hours and restless nights. The apartment feels like it's become part of me. Or maybe I've become part of it. It's hard to say. The walls, the floor, even the air. Everything is familiar now, but strangely, it feels like I've always been here. I know the routine. I wake up, I sit, I write. But there's nothing on the pages anymore. Just an endless loop of thoughts I can't quite remember, but can't shake either. I've stopped trying to make sense of it. I have nothing left to prove. I don't remember the last time I felt a real connection to anything or anyone. The other tenants? They come and go, like fleeting shadows. Sometimes, I see them out of the corner of my eye, just before they disappear behind a door or around a corner. I don't talk to them much anymore. They've stopped trying to talk to me. It's as if we all know we're the same, bound to this place. I think it's been months since the new tenant moved in. They came the same way I did, carrying boxes, looking nervous, and trying to pretend that everything was normal. They never asked why the rent was so cheap, and I didn't bother to tell them. There's no point. The other tenants are already watching them, just as they watched me when I first arrived. The whispers start almost immediately. I can hear them through the thin walls. Those little murmurs that make the air feel heavier. The new tenant, I don't even know their name yet, but I can tell they're already starting to feel it. They haven't caught on, not yet, but soon they will. It's inevitable. I saw them standing by the window yesterday, just like I did when I first moved in. They stared out at the same street that's been empty for years, as if waiting for something, maybe someone. But there's no one left out there. I know that now. The world beyond these walls doesn't exist for us anymore. I was there once too, just like they are now. I can still remember the first time Pavlov spoke to me. The way his voice slid through the air, calm and cold, just like the room around him. You understand now, don't you? He asked, smiling like he knew a secret I'd never be allowed to learn. And I think in some twisted way, he was right. I understand now. The new tenant has started to smile more often, faintly at first, like a half-remembered dream. It's funny how quickly we change. I guess I'm not the same person I was when I first walked through that door. I don't even think I remember who I was anymore. But I'm not sure it matters. I go to greet them today, standing in the hallway with a smile. It's a practiced gesture, one I've worn for longer than I care to admit. They look up as I approach, their eyes wide, but there's something in them, an understanding, perhaps, something they've seen in the corner of their eye. Maybe it's just the reflection of the walls. Maybe it's just the air. I nod at them, a simple, almost comforting gesture. They hesitate, but then they smile back. And for a moment, it feels like everything is just as it should be. You're going to like it here, I say, my voice low, almost too quiet to hear. They don't say anything, but they don't need to. They're already starting to understand.